je vous ai fait une présentation en 4 phases. La première étant quelques idées principales que j'aimerais développer plus particulièrement.
Okay, so I've prepared a presentation in 4 parts. One general introduction, and then basically the 3 aspects of my practice, of my work that I've just mentioned. So.
La première idée, c'est effectivement l'éducation.
Okay, so my first hat is that of teaching architects, and I've done that for about 30 years. And the way we teach architecture makes architects believe that what they build is for eternity.
Et cette idée est particulièrement fausse et erronée.
And that's a false idea, and yeah.
Et donc, la faute à l'enseignement sans doute, la faute aussi à l'état d'esprit général des architectes à travers le monde, qui est de tout le temps considérer leur œuvre comme un élément d'éternité et non pas comme un élément de passage.
So the error is in the way we teach architecture, and also the mentality of architects throughout the world, which tend to consider that their work is there for eternity rather than something that passes through.
Donc quand on regarde l'histoire des villes, ce sont les bâtiments qui sont conservés au-delà de cette période.
So if we look at most buildings, we will notice that more or less every 30 years, because of use, because of changes in the regulation, because of changes in security measures or whatever, the building inside at least is changed. And but the building itself, the structure itself, may last at most about 2 centuries. There are very few buildings that will last longer than 2 centuries.
Or donc, si les bâtiments de la forme urbaine.
But if it is true that the buildings disappear or change, what is permanent in European cities is the networks of streets, the division of plots, the canals, all that series of networks that exist in what we call the morphology, basically. That is permanent. That is what gives the character to the city.
Et donc la première idée que je défends dans cette
So what I defend in my argument is this understanding of the networks, understanding of the morphology of the city, and use that as a basis of the design, basically.
Alors, il y a quand même des bâtiments qui sont restés en place. Et donc on peut avoir une idée en Europe.
There are, of course, a few buildings that remain, that have a much longer history, and those we look at with sympathy, with more respect. And those. Attends, qu'est-ce que tu as dit à la fin? J'ai déjà oublié.
Que c'est une idée assez récente.
But this looking with greater attention to these buildings is in fact a fairly new idea in Europe.
Par exemple, dans l'histoire des idées en France, on trouve du clergé et de la royauté.
So in France, for instance, this idea of having an interest in the heritage appears at the moment of the revolution, which coincides with a time that for revolutionary reasons, important monuments, both religious or of the state, are being demolished.
Et donc cette idée de patrimoine est née à la fin du les églises, les châteaux et les monuments, les mégalithes, enfin toutes les voilà, bon, en France, je parle.
So this idea of having a heritage to protect developed from the end of the 18th century through the 19th century, but evolved since it started by only protecting churches, palaces, castles, and Celtic monuments, Stonehenge and so on.
Et par contre, le XXe siècle a eu sur le patrimoine entamé par le 19e siècle.
So at the beginning of the 20th century, there's a complete change because the concept of avant-garde and of modernity appears, and that enters in conflict with this idea of protecting the heritage and dealing with the heritage. So there's a beginning of a conflict there.
On pourrait dire même, et ce lieu m'en offre l'occasion, j'y avais pas pensé, néo-gothique, et donc l'intérêt du néo-gothique, c'est d'être plus gothique que le gothique. Et donc, voilà, c'est une...
So, I mean, this room, I hadn't thought about it, but this room is an example of what was happening in the 19th century when there was not just protecting the heritage, but recreating the heritage and, for instance, making a neo-Gothic room which is more Gothic than the Gothic.
Mais c'est également l'idée de la Renaissance, qui cherche à être plus romain ou plus grec, voilà, que de retrouver dans les traces des architectures anciennes les raisons d'une architecture nouvelle.
But that's also, of course, what happened in the Renaissance to a certain extent, a rediscovery of past models.
Pour en revenir à l'idée première, que l'idée des aspirations de la société.
So, going back to this idea of looking at the morphology of the city, the next thing is that we have to think that because society changes, society evolves, so does the typology of buildings.
Et donc, si l'on ajoute bien ces deux, la cité prochaine.
So basically, these are two fundamental principles. Understand the morphology and what is fundamental in the history of the city, and understand how the typology of buildings evolves as well, according to the needs of today. That will give us the idea of how to design the city of the future.
Mais elle est également une mémoire de l'architecture des maisons en bois.
So I put this example of evolution of typology. The middle one is a house that still exists, a house by Guimard, the one who did the metros in Paris. And the ones in timber on either side don't exist anymore, but that was the typology that existed before. And so it's a reinterpretation of a past style in a different material, a different language, basically, but it's still the memory of that typology.
Cet deuxième exemple, évidemment, et c'est mon premier livre d'architecture de ma collection. Donc c'est un peu sentiment.
These are the English cemeteries in the north of France, designed by Lutyens and gardens by Gertrude Jekyll, and they're based on drawings that appear in one of the first architectural books that he bought.
When I was 14 in England. So, mais l'intérêt, il est évidemment que et même le sol est une propriété britannique. Voilà.
So what it is again a reinterpretation of a Celtic design or Norman design taken by Lutyens and reinterpreted in his houses and then in these pieces of England that have been exported to France.
Et donc, ces lieux sont superbes, évidemment, mais...
So at an interval of 1,500 years, those things are more or less the same. They're just reinterpretations of the same.
Deuxième élément de Lille qui était classé monument historique.
So this is a completely different example, something that has taken 4 years to be resolved and went to court. And it was related to the expansion of that stadium that you see in the back and its relationship to the Citadel, which is a listed building.
Comme vous pouvez le voir, la citadelle est un élément qui est étendu et donc qui est relativement plat. En fait, c'est un travail sur le relief.
The Citadel, as you can see, is a sort of large, flat development that uses the relief of the land.
Et donc là, vous avez en parallèle une carte anglaise. Elle n'est pas réellement lisible en plan, elle est lisible en élévation.
So here you have an English map of the citadel in Lille, and you can see from it, it's not just the building, but it's all the ditches and the various expansion of the fortifications beyond the building. And here you see the relationship of the stadium, but you see it flat, and you have to see it in 3 dimensions to see what the conflict is.
Donc la coupe, vous l'avez en bas.
And here you have the section in the bottom.
Et effectivement, ce rapport de hauteur a été jugé par la plus grande instance française, c'est-à-dire le Conseil d'État.
And this issue went up through various stages of tribunals to the highest court in France, and it was decided then.
Et donc, l'exposé, de construire l'attaque de la place et finalement d'aller poser des bombes qui vont faire exploser la fortification.
And we explained that the role of that fortification, how it operated in the defense, how it was built, and how it uses the topography to do so. That was part of our argument against the stadium.
Et donc de mettre un stade aussi haut à côté de cette citadelle aussi plate était un contresens historique sur la compréhension de la raison du profil du site.
So we argued that to put such a high structure next to an element that was basically flat was a contradiction, and a historic contradiction that went against the interpretation of the role of that building or that structure in there.
Et donc le Conseil d'État nous a donné raison sur cette protection et cette qualité de protection du monument historique.
And so we won our case on that basis.
Et je vous assure que ce genre de combat est difficile à mener pour une association contre une ville, une communauté et un ministère.
And I can guarantee that this was very hard for an association like ours, that we had to fight first against the city, then against an association of cities, and then eventually against the ministry.
Le deuxième exemple, c'est des travaux d'étudiants que j'ai menés il y a 2 ans sur une partie de la ville de Lille qui se trouve en dessous de la citadelle, mais dans une partie qui est la ville agrandie après 1858.
The second example is one that it's a project I did with some students also in the city near the citadel, but in the part of the city that was expanded in the 19th century.
Donc, qui est cette partie ici, qui est en fait l'ancien port fluvial de la ville qui aujourd'hui a déménagé, et donc ce port fluvial a été comblé dans les années 1970.
And this was originally the port, the river port of the city, but the port moved somewhere else, and the place was filled.
Ça. Et autre variation, c'est, vous le voyez, entre capacités.
And also you can see, comparing the two maps, that the line of the river changed, and today it's a canal basically, and so it's a wide canal. It's no longer the natural river.
Donc voilà quelques images de 1858.
So you have a few images of the canal and of the buildings around, warehouses, and an example of a toll building that was on the fortifications.
Et donc là, voici une introduction pour l'expansion de la cité.
So this is one of the projects of the students, which reintroduces the water, reintroduces the port, and the various equipments related to the port, but also new buildings.
Donc voilà les projets qui ont été développés en bassin de plaisance entre la ville et un jardin, et une île récréative.
So it becomes again a port, but a marina in fact, and there are a series of buildings that contribute to the new environment basically.
Bon, là, je pensais le plan, donc on ne va pas s'attarder.
Il faut y aller.
Donc, deuxième projet, maquette finale.
Just to show that there are various other possibilities, there's no one answer to one of these problems, so another project for the same area.
Voilà, avec ici des images qui montrent, et puis un parking avec au-dessus un espace public.
As part of that, there were buildings of the 70s that could be converted, could be transformed.
C'est cette partie-là sur la maquette ici que l'on aperçoit ici en plan. Dernier temps.
Last example and last hat.
Oui, c'est un projet urbain près de Senlis.
It's a project for an area about 40 kilometers north of Paris.
Et donc dans ce village de
in that village there was a palace that had been enlarged a lot by the brother of Napoleon.
Donc
the brother of Napoleon, having come back from Spain, having looted quite a lot of money, had used his money to enlarge, fundamentally enlarge this palace and the gardens around it.
Donc cela a été fait entre l'anglais de 1848.
This is this garden, which was done between 18 and 1815, was then remain and evolved during the first half of the 19th century, but is a key garden, a key example of the first half of the 19th century, and it was again designed by an English gardener.
Le village et le grand parc de l'autre côté.
So there's a village next to the castle and the garden.
Et donc ont été transformés en pépinières.
The question was how to expand the village. And the village has the relationship to the park, but also surrounding it were a series of nurseries.
Et donc, cette région de l'Oise.
And the nurseries gave that village its specific character. And it became known because of the nurseries.
Et donc le projet urbain que nous avons des anciennes pépinières.
So what we did in our proposal was to use the morphology of those nurseries, which don't function anymore because now the nurseries have gone to Germany, so these commercially they don't work anymore. But the existing character, the existing morphology of these was the basis of our proposal.
Et ensuite nous partions de ce village.
And then we used the typologies that existed in the village, which were either rural houses or villas, 19th century villas, or big farmyards with a courtyard in the middle. And we used these three types of forms to recreate new buildings following that same kind of typology.
On peut voir aussi que par rapport à la définition de l'architecture.
And so, in an example like this, the landscape is more important than the architecture. The character of this village is fundamentally created by the landscape, not by the architecture. So, this is what you have to take from it.
Et la dernière partie, c'est cette installée des constructions.
So, what you have there is a detail of part of this area where you had a park originally, which had been the nursery was built on top of the park, and that more or less eliminated the form except the edges and the main alley that existed. And their proposal recreates the edge of the park, follows the morphology of the nursery, and recreates the big axe. So again, reinterprets the heritage.
Et donc voilà un peu le dernier propos que je souhaitais vous présenter. Merci à Sébastien, je suis désolé pour le temps que j'ai pris.
Okay. That was the last example, and I'm sorry for the time that it's taken, but those are the three examples. We will keep questions for after our next speaker.